guys, welcome to part 1 of my Tactics PvP guide. In this one I'm going to cover the passives that are baked into the Tactics spec here, so some of the baked-in goodies, and I'll talk about the utilities here and some of the utility points you could pick for PvP here. So just diving right in, we'll start with the first one here, Gut. So this is just a pretty basic part of your rotation. It's completely pivotal on always being on the target, and it's really easy to keep on the target. You just basically apply it and forget about it for the most part. And this gut ability is going to be enhanced by other passes down the tree here. So this one ends up being covered in part 2 where I start talking about the rotation a little more, but I'll talk about the passes for now, and we'll get to a little more detail later about it. So next one, high energy cell here. Just basically free damage. It's not that interesting a passive, it's just 5% more damage, so it's kind of nice. So next one, Grenadiers Ship. This is a really good, important passive you get pretty early for Tactics spec here. So just to look at it a little more in depth, it reduces the cooldown of Artillery Blitz by 5 seconds, which is a really nice AoE ability that you get. Does a lot of damage, and it's up a lot more often, so it's great for Tactics. So Flak Shell does 25% more damage, and its cooldown is reduced by 6 seconds, so it's actually something you can spam pretty frequently, and it's really nice. It does actually a lot of damage, and it's really easy to apply because it's effective at 10 meters, and it blows up around wherever you hit, so it's pretty easy to aim that way. It's pretty foolproof. Now it's kind of nice that Flak Shell also refreshes the bleed effect on from your gut, so you could, in theory, apply gut to a bunch of people all standing next to each other and then hit them with a Flak Shell, and that would refresh the duration on everybody. So if you're looking at situations where you need to do like a lot of AoE damage, it's one passive that actually provides a lot. So you have a reduced cooldown on your Artillery Blitz, so you're going to be doing a little more AoE damage from that. Your Flak Shell, is significantly buffed and its cooldown's reduced. And you can also keep some dots rolling on everybody, and there's a passive down the tree later that anything that bleeds takes 5% more damage, so if everything you're AoEing is taking bleed damage, you can just keep that dot up with Flak Shell, so it's a pretty nice passive. Serrated Blades, next guy here, so it increases the bleed damage by 15%, so that's really nice, and the really important part of the other part of this talent here is the armor debuff that you get from using Stock Strike. So it puts Stock Strike in your priority list really high, just because it applies that armor reduction. So it's a really important debuff to apply because for basically nearly everything you do is going to be affected by your armor debuff being on the target. So next one, very critical passive here for the spec, high friction bolts. I'll just read it out here. A high impact bolt may be fired at targets that are not incapacitated or suffering from periodic damage. So basically what that means is high impact bolt, if you're not Tactics spec, requires a tech debuff to be on the target before you can use it. And what this means for Tactics with this passive is you could just use high impact bolt no matter what. So for situations where the best way to think of it is if your tech debuffs get wiped by, let's say, like a shadow or an assassin, they use that cloak that prevents, that wipes all their tech damage and makes them immune to anything tech. You can still hit them with high impact bolt, which is weapon damage, but if you're plasma tech or tank spec, you couldn't hit them because you couldn't apply a tech debuff in the first place. So it's kind of a nice thing anyway, just to keep in your back pocket. It's something to think about if you ever run into a shadow or an assassin. So the rest of this talent here, in addition, high impact bolt ignores 30% of the target's armor, regenerates 5 energy cells if it hits a bleeding target, and refreshes the duration of your gut's bleed effect if present. So this is why gut is so easy, or at least the bleed effect is so easy to keep on targets, is because your high impact bolt is going to refresh it as well. Your Flak Shell will refresh it too, and they're both those are both things you can use at range. So if you have a bunch of bleed effects running on people, obviously you hit Flak Shell to refresh it, and it just generally you're going to be hitting a high impact bolt a lot with this spec, so that's just going to be a brainless, easy way of maintaining your bleed dot. Now the really important thing is to make sure that you always use gut first in your rotation, because you can see because of this passive here, it ignores, if it's bleeding, 30% of the target's armor, which is huge, and you get a little bit of energy back. So it's a pretty important passive here. So it really puts Gut as one of the most important abilities for Tactics Spec. It's just you have to make sure it's on your target. Okay, so Tactical Surge here, this is basically a complete replacement for Ion Pulse. Like, Ion Pulse doesn't hit that hard, and Tactical Surge just gives it just flat more. It's, as a replacement, just gives it a lot more damage. And this is going to be your kind of spammable attack to kind of reset some of the mechanics in your rotation here. So this ability can be used at 10 meters, just like Ion Pulse. So basically everything that applies to Ion Pulse as far as like how to use it in PvP here. You can hide behind line of sight, that kind of stuff. It applies to Tactical Surge as well. Alright, so next one, Tactical Armor. This is, I mean, it's not nothing. It's not, in my opinion, great either, because it relies on getting critically hit for it to proc. And there are a lot of critical hits get sent out there, so it would be more ideal if it was just kind of a static, you just always had 6% damage reduction. Because the class is a little on the squishy side because it doesn't have any sustaining healing abilities, for example. Like, they can't just like hide around line of sight and heal themselves up and continue fighting. It's just kind of, once the tricks run out, they're just so vulnerable. There's nothing they can do to keep themselves alive.
Could have gone worse.
So that for that reason, they're just tending to be a little more squishy than some of the other classes running around right now. You'll find in PvP that this is up on a fairly regular basis because it's any critical hits that you get hit with, so it's not necessarily like the really big ones. You can have a dot placed on you, for example, and you might just get like a lot of small critical hits will just build up over time just from the the dot rather. So it's pretty high uptime on this thing, but it's just not always up. And at the beginning of an engagement, kind of when you really want to have as much defensive as you can, it just takes a little bit before it finally kicks in. So for that reason, it's a little on the kind of weak side in my mind. So next one here, Riot Ogz. This is just a flat damage boost. It's not too interesting of the passive to talk about, but yeah, the extra damage is really nice here. Next one, Tactical Accelerator. Basically makes your high impact bolt reset and doesn't cost anything to use. So this occurs every 6 seconds. So what it means is, in an ideal world, you're proccing this thing every 6 seconds, and it's not difficult to do in this spec. It's actually very fluid in how it procs, so it shouldn't be an issue for most people. But something to keep in mind is with this proc is you will find yourself in PvP especially, maybe not so much in PvE, but at PvP, your fluid perfect rotation doesn't always happen because you might find yourself, you get stunned, or maybe you have to use a global cooldown for something other than resetting the proc on your high impact bolt. So for those situations where the 6 seconds has already passed and you haven't used the high impact bolt yet, it would be best to use your high impact bolt first. Then you can use something like your stock strike, for example, to proc to reset it. So that way you can high impact bolt again. And the reason you'd want to do that is so you get an extra stack for your big cell burst. Because if you reset, like if you have it available and then reset it again, it's like it's kind of wasted. You just wasted building up an additional stack for your energy burst. So it's something to keep in mind with this passive is if you can high impact bolt and then reset it and high impact bolt again, do it because you can build stacks faster for your cell burst. Okay, so next one, Triumph, increases the damage you deal to bleeding targets by 5%, so that's why having Gut on your target, or at least the bleed, is really important. So you only have to apply it once, and you get really easily to maintain it. And then, of course, it increases the damage just from everything else once it bleeds on it, so that's, again, really important. Okay, next one here, Assault Plastique. Basically, it's part of your burst. It's a really nice grenade. And there's another passive that will apply a debuff as well, but from just like sheer damage numbers, this is like one of your highest priority abilities because it hits so hard. Okay, Sonic Defense. Now this one isn't like a bad defensive because 30% defensive chance is really strong, And to give you an idea why it's effective is you might find classes are trying to throw some stuns at you if they're trying to kill you, for example, or if there's like a burst window they're trying to hit. If you can pop your sonic round, it's kind of nice. You're going to find a lot of their stuff is going to miss. Now there is that it's RNG catch here, because yeah, there's going to be a significant chance that they miss stuff, but it's more likely they're going to hit you. So it is kind of one of those things where there is a good time and a bad time to use this. So it's generally if you're going to be in a position where someone can kill you, you want to pop this. You don't want to pop it too early, and it's unfortunate it's tied to your taunt. So you're going to be split between using your taunt to provide peels for your team, because it reduces damage in an AoE, and you're also splitting your needing it for the actual defensive chance here. So your taunt's on a 45-second cooldown, so you will have to make some decisions on when you want to take advantage of this passive. But for the most part, for tactics, if you anticipate taking a lot of damage, you probably want to save this one for when you're going to need it personally, rather than helping your team. But you'll be able to judge correctly with a little more experience when you should be using it. So next one, not that interesting a talent. Just one thing to mention is you do get some extra defensive defense chance here, and if there's other players who aren't stacking hit, so for example, like there's specs like concealment operatives, or like a plasma tech Vanguard, for example, because so much of the rotation's all tech damage, like 95% of it, they don't need hit. So if there's a spec out there running around with 0 hit in PvP, which is a legit gearing strategy, you're just going to be a little bit harder for them to deal with, just because a little more of their abilities are going to be missing. So it's not nothing for a defensive here, but it's not great either. Okay, next one, Havoc Training. Just basically a little bit of free damage here, just on some of your abilities, and it also adds a 5% debuff, or 5% tech attack debuff on the target for 45 seconds. So basically, since a large part of the rotation from tactics is all tech damage, this is going to be really nice. Your high impact bolt is weapon damage, so it won't benefit from it, but basically everything else will. So it's kind of a nice debuff to make sure that if you can, get your grenade on them really quick. Because just anything that follows a grenade afterwards, it benefits from that 5% damage. So next one here, Reflexive Shield. This is a pretty important defensive passive, and just the sheer reason why is because every time you get hit, it reduces the active cooldown of Reactive Shield by 3 seconds, and that is pretty much your bread and butter defensive abilities, your Reactive Shield. That's what's going to keep you alive. Now it does have like a secondary effect on Reflective Shield here, where you get like a chance to absorb a little bit of damage, and again, it's not nothing, but absorbing 4,000 damage-ish, maybe give or take. It's not really much, but it's better than nothing. It does take a little bit of the heat off, so I'll take it. But the big reason I like this passive is because it reduces the cooldown on Reactive Shield. Okay, next one, Cell Burst. This is the money shot here. This is what makes all the magic happen when you can get it to your max stacks here, because this thing just hits like a truck. So it's really important to make sure. I mentioned earlier that other passive, the one that resets your high impact bolt. You want to make sure that you're using it to build as many stacks, many energy load stacks, just so your Cell Burst can hit as hard as possible. Alright, so next one, Charge Loaders. Not terribly interesting. It's just pretty much just free damage. Just a couple things get a little boost here. And of course you do get an additional 3 missiles. So the thing with your shoulder missile is, if you can, you want to try and line up your shoulder missile with your battle focus, so that way like all the missiles will crit. Alright, so next one, Critical Recharge. Again, just a little bit of free damage here. It's not that interesting. And it also reduces the cooldown of your recharge cells and reserve power cell by 30 seconds. So that's actually kind of nice, because you will find in PvP it is pretty easy just to keep mashing nuke. So being able to control that a little more often is kind of nice. And the really important thing to note here as well is on this one, it gives recharge and reload, basically just, you know, the thing that gives you ammo and heal up between fights. It charges stacks for energy loads. Sorry, yeah, builds energy load stacks. Sorry, my brain just half fried there. So you can see I'm building stacks up here. So now I'm at max stacks. So basically, before you start any engagement, if you have the option of building stacks before you enter a fight, do it. And these don't fall off. It's permanent. You don't have to do anything to maintain them once they're built up. It's just have to remember that just make sure you get your debuffs up, and then you can cell burst somebody in the face really hard. Okay, and last one to talk about here, cell burn. This is you know, kind of a nice little passive. I think what BioWare wanted to do is to give cell burst a little bigger punch, but they didn't want to make the burst over the top. So this is a way that the extra damage is kind of spread out over time a little bit, and it's not nothing. This thing it's kind of nice to have. So all right, so that's the passives for today. Now, as far as utilities go, you have wiggle room, and your choices are going to be nuanced based on whether you're just going to be doing regular war zones, or if you plan on doing something a little more intense like ranked arenas. You're going to find your choices here are going to be a little more nuanced. Yeah, and that'll be based on, you know, the kind of the other classes you're running with, and if you anticipate being the DPS target, that kind of stuff. So just to start off here, I've kind of just picked my go-to build for tactics right now. This is what I find seems to be working the best for me, and there is flexibility here. You can actually pick some different ones, and that would be fine. This is kind of just like a default one I think people could use that would perform well. So first up here we have Iron Will. This reduces the cooldown on Tenacity by 30 seconds and the cooldown of Hold the Line by 10 seconds. So the big reason I like this one is for the reduction on Hold the Line, because that's such an important cooldown for Vanguards, because it provides you protection from movement impairing effects, knockdown, physics, and it also gives you a little bit of a run speed buff as well. So it's really strong if you're trying to go after somebody. It makes you impossible to be kited, and it also makes it really hard for melee, for example, to try to stay on your ass and deal damage, because you can always get away with them. They can't stop you from running unless they stun you, for example. So and it's on a short cooldown as well, so it's going to be up a lot. So that's pretty much the main reason I take it. And just the the 30 seconds off Tenacity is kind of nice. A little cherry on top. So next one, this one's pretty much a no-brainer for PvP. The combat stims passive is just so strong, because you're going to find getting stunned or immobilized. You're just rooted, for example. You're getting rooted and stunned like all the time. It's just going to be proccing like crazy for you. So the energy you get back is really strong, so it means you can go probably burn your ammo out a lot harder than you normally would in PvE, and this thing's going to be feeding you ammo back all the time, so it's pretty nice. And the extra 10% damage you get is going to be proccing a lot too, so some of your abilities hit really hard, so if they get an extra 10% from this one, it's pretty nice. So next one, Reflective Armor. This one, your mileage is going to vary quite a bit. So if you were finding, if you're going to be doing a lot of ranked arenas and you're running into a lot of people that are just cleaving, there are pressure comps out there like Dock Cleave specs, for example. You would get actually a lot of mileage if you were running a spec like a utility like this here, because it would reflect a lot of damage back. But if you're doing just regular Warzone kind of thing, you're going to find that there's going to be some times where this talent is really nice, and then other times where you get like 0 mileage out of it. So personally, it's not for me. I don't typically pick it. I like to pick some other things I find are a lot more useful, but for some people you might actually find a good use for this one. Now next one, Entangling Tools. I really like this one for PvP, because what I find is being able to control your opponent is so much more important than doing that extra 5 or 10% more damage, because controlling your opponents is going to land your kills. So that's the way I see it. Now the really nice thing about this one is you're going to be Tactical Surge and Explosive Surge are going to be getting a 30% snare, and it only lasts 3 seconds, but because you're basically spamming those so often, it just always means you don't have to do anything to apply snare. It's just automatic as part of your rotation, so it's pretty nice. Now, Neural Jolt, your taunt there, it's got an even stronger snare at 50% snare, and that lasts 6 seconds, so that's really good. And the cool thing about that snare is it's off the global cooldown, so it doesn't take away from dealing damage. You could still stop someone from trying to get away from you, for example, and not interrupt your damage rotation. A lot of other specs out there, if they need to root someone or hit them with the snare, it costs a global cooldown to do that, so their damage in that brief moment isn't as strong as yours will be. So it's kind of a nice thing, without it, Tactics on its own doesn't have any native kind of snare, so if you don't pick this talent, you're going to find classes are going to get away from you a little easier than you would hope. So this for Tactics I find is actually like a really strong choice. Plasma Tech, you wouldn't need it. You could probably get away with not having it because Plasma Tech does have some other options for like baked-in goodies like roots and snares, but Tactics has nothing like that, so for this talent I find is really necessary. So next one, Containment Tactics here. I personally never use it, but you could make an argument for taking it, and the reason being is it reduces the cooldown on Cryo Grenade by 15 seconds, so that's your single target stun. And it'll bring it down to the same cooldown as your AoE stun. So if you find yourself using both stuns at the same time, so like if you're stun locking someone to land a kill, you might get some mileage out of this one, but I find personally I don't always need that extra reduction on the stun. Usually by the time both my stuns have been used, I've pretty much landed the kill already. I'm not really so worried about the next one. It's just landing the first one. So for me, I find by the time I actually need to use both my stuns again, they're both up anyway, so I don't see this one getting too much mileage. But if someone else is leaning on their stuns a little more for the kind of playstyle they're doing, then you might find this one useful. Accelerated Reel, basically this one is a wasted utility point just because you're not using Harpoon all that often, and your other picks in this tier are very strong. So you would have to give up something better just to use this, and you know, if you just wanted to, like, you know, try some off-brand version of Tactics where you run with like the Harpoon tactical, maybe you'd want to pick it Accelerated Reel for that, but other than that wonky kind of build, you would never pick this one really. So next one, Shrap Satchel? Yeah. Oh my god, my English is broken. Basically just increases your explosive surge damage by 25%. Now this is like a decent pick for PvE, but in PvP it's not that good. Explosive surge, I mean, it does so little damage, like you would be spam casting this thing forever and you probably wouldn't kill anybody. So just to buff its damage, you have way better buttons to hit than explosive surge. Basically the best way to think of explosive surge as Tactics spec is it's an effective way of applying an AoE 30% snare if you picked up Entangling Tools. That's really all it's good for. You have a lot better buttons to hit for that, for AoE anyway. So next one, Muzzle Dogs, just increases the range on your Tactical Surge and your Explosive Surge. It's more of a PvE utility, to be honest, in my opinion. You're going to find there's going to be some times where, yeah, maybe that extra couple meters is useful, but for the most part, you're fighting in people's faces, or they're completely getting away from you. So there's not too many chances where this actually gets a lot of utility. So you'll find there's other picks that are so much more effective for PvP than this one. So that's that tier. So the next one here, you have flexibility as well, and this is going to be really nuanced on what some of your choices are here. So first one up, Electro Shield. Now, because Tactics has that baked-in goodie that resets the cooldown on your reactive shield is going to be up a lot more often. So I picked Electro Shield just because the damage isn't terrible. If somebody tunnels you the whole time reactive shield is up, then they actually eat a lot of elemental damage. So it's not bad, and you know, it's up more often, so this will be doing a little more damage. So it's not a bad pick. You know, it's just like a flat damage boost. Now the next one, Battlefield Training. I really like this one because I find being able mobility is so important in PvP than perhaps trying to boost my damage a little bit more, or it's just one of those X factors where I have a better quality of life, so I could deal better, like more effective damage. So you don't necessarily have to pick this one. There's some other good ones in this tier as well, but I would definitely advise it for people who are just kind of putting their foot in the water as far as tactics go. So next one, frontline defense. This is a very nuanced choice here, and it's just really for the damage reduction on from AoE damage. 30% is really strong, but the thing about this is, like, this is kind of a more of a ranked arena focus here, where if you're doing it, if you're expecting to take like a lot of cleave damage, so if there's like a pressure comp, that's just dotting people up and cleaving them. Then this would actually mitigate a lot of damage. So in most regular war zones, you're going to find you're not going to need it that much. You'll should be able to, because the class fights so effectively at range, be able to keep out of most of the AoE. And there's some other good options to pick here. So that's really the only reason you would take this one if you expect to take a lot of AoE damage. And just the icing on the cake here, reducing the cooldown of Riot Strike. That's your interrupt by 2 seconds. It's kind of nice, but this utility is not going to get a lot of mileage, I think, for most people. So next one, Sonic Rebounder. Now this is a super strong utility pick here, and I do pick this one often in PvP. Today I'm going with something else, but this is a really strong pick, and the reason being is there's a lot of classes doing some very strong burst windows right now. So if you can understand the mechanics of a class that's about to unload their burst window on you, for example, or on someone else rather, you can use your sonic round in that critical burst window, and that reduces a lot. And for example, you can have like a concealment operative blows himself up real quick, or an assassin mauls himself to the face, or commando gets a demo round back to their face. It really hurts. So it's kind of a nice thing to toss out there. So next one's Smothering Slag. This is actually a super strong snare, and lasts forever. So like 75% reduced speed for 15 seconds. You're going to find people are going to react very strongly to that kind of a snare, because it's so strong. It'll feel like to the other person that like they can't move, and that provokes a reaction. So keep your eyes peeled if this hits a bunch of people, and check to see who's popping cooldowns to get out of it. In a lot of cases, they may not need to, but some people will react very strongly, and you can take advantage of it if you're paying attention. Now, something to note about this passive here is that it can only occur once every 30 seconds. So you might find yourself kind of holding back on flak shell sometimes, where you want to save the really strong snare for certain moments, because you don't want to blow it early on, like a Sage, for example. And they have that strong snare, and then just to get rid of it, they blow their sprint and then get away from you, and then now you can't use that snare again for 30 seconds, and that was like a really easy way for them to get out of it. So in a more perfect situation, you find yourself like hanging on to your flak shell, so after you see they've used their sprint and they can't get rid of the snare anymore, then you can flak shell them, and then they're stuck with that snare unless they pop some other cooldown. So you may find yourself doing less damage, or not wanting to use flak shell when you really should be. So this one you might find it's not great in all situations. I personally played with it and found the snare was super good, but I didn't like the 30 seconds limit, though. That really kind of broke it for me. So I didn't use this one all too often, but I have tried it out, and it is super strong, but I'll let you decide if it's worth it for you. So next one, Strategic Supremacy. Not a good pick. You're not going to be running some kind of wonky harpoon build, and the rest of the buffs sound like really nice on paper, but when you actually try it, for example, like putting your stealth scan down and then having people run through it, and to get increased movement speed, nobody knows to run through that. Like, you start throwing that out there. I've tried it, and almost nobody knows how to use this thing, and you could try to aim it so people get the run speed buff, but it only works in brief situations, so you may not get a lot of mileage out of this one. But if you're working in a coordinated group, you could maybe make some kind of argument for taking this, but for most people, this has got so low value compared to some of the other picks you have in this tier, I wouldn't suggest it over some of your other options here, but there could be some wonky situations you could find something that might be cool to use it for. So next one, Paralytic Ogz. This is not a great pick. I mean, it's like a pretty good option for extending the duration of your stuns, but in a lot of cases, you're only going to get, if you pick this utility, maybe like an extra global cooldown, maybe a second one against someone else using it, and that's a pretty high price to pay considering some of the utility the other options are going to provide you here. So yeah, I wouldn't suggest it. I'd pick something else if I were you. Alright, so the one I did actually go with here, Efficient Tools. This is a really strong passive, just for one reason only, is just because it provides you like a second CC breaker. Now, typically in PvP, you don't worry about soft CC so much because it's not going to kill you, because as soon as someone damages you, it breaks. So if someone has a dot on you, or if a DPS is trying to kill you and they hit you with soft CC, unless they're healing up, they have to hit you right away. So there's really no incentive to break soft CC, because most of the time if you just wait it out, you're going to be totally fine. But the thing you do worry about is getting a hard stun twice, because people can still damage you and it doesn't break. So that's what you kind of worry about the most as a Tactics Vanguard, because Vanguards are a little on the squishy side, so like they don't handle being pressured, sustained pressured for a long time. Usually their tricks are going to run out before everyone else's does, so they tend to be a little vulnerable once your defenses are off cooldown there. So having a second CC breaker is actually really nice, and if you're really clever about alternating between your two CC breakers, you're going to catch a lot of people who are trying to kill you, and you can just slip out of it. You just always have a good response that way, when because some classes do, or if you run into situations where you have a class that can stun you twice, or you have a couple of people that are attacking you that together they can stack their stuns and like chain their stuns on you. So this just lets you get out of jail for free, basically. So for that reason, it's actually super strong on its own. Now, the icing on the cake here is Efficient Tools also increases the range of your harpoon and shoulder cannon by 10 meters. Now, the shoulder cannon, meh, who cares about the missiles, but the 10-meter range on a harpoon, though, is deceiving, because it is actually super strong. Now, if you're really clever about using harpoon, you can pull people from incredible distances into, like, behind like a wall, for example, for your team to blow up. So your team can blow him up and the other team can't see their guy because he's stuck behind the line of sight. So very, very good utility here. Now, you don't have to pick this. There's other options in this tier you could go with, but just for the second CC breaker, this is actually an incredibly strong choice. Okay, so the last tier here. First one up, Re-Energizers. This one sucks. You could hardly make an argument for using it in PvE, but in PvP it's a completely wasted utility. There's so many better options in this one. So next one, Advance the Line. We talked about a little bit about Hold the Line before, and this just increases the duration, so you get that protection and mobility for longer. So this, and because it's so important of a cooldown, I consider this one pretty much critical. Next one, Guard Cannon. Now, Tactics does get more of a benefit here because of that passive that gives you an additional 3 missiles. It gives you like a little bit more healing, but the healing you do get is not that much, I find. Like, it doesn't let you survive all that much longer. You might survive maybe like a couple global cooldowns longer, so basically someone has to hit you with like 2 more abilities for this utility to become worthless. So you can make your call on whether living an extra 3 seconds is worth it or not, but the other thing to consider is that because you can't fire all your missiles out at the same time, the delivery is very slow. It's staggered across all your missiles. So you may get some mileage out of this one, but personally I found it wasn't enough to keep me alive to make anything worthwhile happen. I found it just basically, someone just had to get like one really good crit and this thing was worthless. So next one, Power Focus. This is a super strong passive for DPS specs, or for Vanguards anyway. the DPS specs, just because if you get hit, it increases the duration of your power yield, so you can have it last a maximum of 30 seconds. So that means your damage reduction, because your armor is so high, is going to be through the roof, and you also get an additional 10% damage as well. So just from having 5 stacks up, so it's kind of a nice permanent damage boost to have for 30 seconds. So very strong reasons for taking this one. I would almost call it mandatory for DPS specs, because you need that just to survive, and the damage boost is really nice. Okay, so next one, aim extensions. This one's pretty meh in my opinion, because yeah, it might be nice to have the increased distance on the 20 meters, but all that damage you're increasing the range on, you can do the same thing within melee range, so you're not it doesn't cost you anything really to do the same amount of damage, as long as you're standing just a little bit closer. So for that reason, you can put that utility point to maybe something that's a little better. So next one, charge the line. Now this one you can make an argument for taking it or not taking it. If you're doing ranked arenas a lot, you may not need the extra mobility this one provides, so you could probably put your money somewhere else here for that utility point. But if you're doing regular war zones, though, this one's really good, because being able to traverse like good long distances quickly is nice, and being able to get away from people, or making sure that no one can get away from you while Hold the Line is up, it's a super strong passive. So really strong argument for taking this one, and this for me has become like an almost mandatory one. I find it really difficult to play without it now after being so used to it. So Pull and Pummel, it's actually not a bad pick. The little bit of damage it does isn't nothing. It's not great either. But what really is cool is it gives your stock strike basically, you'll stun, and it doesn't last too long. It's just 1.5 seconds, but it's actually really nice. You'll find, it doesn't cost you to use one of your cooldowns. It doesn't cost you your longer AoE stun or your longer single target stun. So you can hit someone with Pull and Pummel, and then you use your shock strike and it stuns them for 1.5 seconds, and you can watch to see if people start blowing their CC breakers on that. A lot of people will, and like they didn't have to. It's only at 1.5 seconds. So if you see people popping cooldowns, maybe they didn't need to. You could really take advantage of that. And it also provides you basically like a third stun in your repertoire. So it's really nice. Now it's just a shame that it's just rate limited by your harpoons. So 40 seconds ain't too bad. So you can actually make an argument for taking this. So if you didn't need the mobility from Charge the Line, for example, you could probably put the point into Pull and Pummel, and that would give you a really good, helps boost your damage, and it gives you like a really strong utility option, so you can be a little more versatile in PvP. Having more options with your classes, is good. So last one, Battering Blitz. This one I've played around with, and you would think it's on paper, it sounds great, just like nothing's going to be able to get away with you, because if you storm and they knock you back, you can storm again, you can't get away from me. But, what I found was, because Vanguards are so effective at range, I didn't need to use Storm a second time. Usually if something got away from me, I didn't have any problem staying in range with somebody, because, if I usually approach, just by walking out to them with ranged abilities, and if they get away, then I can use my Storm, my charge. And, if they got away from me again, I could use my Hold the Line. I had snares I could apply. I could hit them with stuns so they couldn't get away. I had my my harpoon. I could pull them back to me. So I always had a button or a response I could have to keep them within melee range if I needed to. I didn't find storming a second time was all that useful, and this utility would be a lot more compelling of a choice if it didn't have for the fact that the second storm doesn't cause an interrupt or a root. So like that's actually part of the magic of storms. It causes an interrupt, and then it also is a root component to as well. So not having those components on the second root kind of sucks, and the being rate limited to 15 seconds kind of sucks as well. So it basically means if you're using charge and cooldown, your storm and cooldown, it's like, that's as good as it's gonna get. And storm's a little buggy sometimes too. Like sometimes it doesn't always work. So if you use your Storm and it breaks, like it doesn't work, it bugs out, and you use Storm again and it bugs out, it's just like, that sucks. Yeah, it's a completely wasted utility slot at that point. So you do have a lot better choices in this tier than Battering Blitz, so I think you probably wouldn't go with it, but I can tell you I've tried it, and I didn't find it all that useful, but maybe someone can get some mileage out of it. So that's basically the passives and the utilities. I'll talk more about the abilities and the rotation, how that works, and how to use those abilities in a PvP context. And in part 3, I'll talk about gearing, the targets you want to hit, and the best slots, best in slot kind of stuff. So anyway, thanks guys.